I guess I never really lived until I turned 64, I thought to myself. David, what did he hold me back from all these years? What did I deprive myself of? This questioning inside me felt like both a rebuke and an awakening. Bruce didn't say anything. He just watched me, and that gave me courage. He supported me, not with his hands, but with his eyes, as my fingers slowly grabbed the straps and pulled them down. "Oh, hi there. Didn't see you there. I was just telling a little story about what we went through. Let me start over so you can get the full picture of how it all unfolded. I was 64 years old, and honestly, I never thought something as innocent as cleaning up would lead to this. All thanks to my step-grandson suddenly showing up. It had been 12 years since my husband David passed away, leaving me feeling lonely and widowed for far too long. It was late morning when I finally decided to tackle the one thing I'd been putting off for years, cleaning out the basement, that chaotic little corner of the house that I avoided every time it crossed my mind. The thought of it tightening my chest. But I'd gathered the courage to face it, that dusty room full of old boxes, musty-smelling junk, and memories of a lifetime. The first box I opened revealed something that caught me completely off guard, an old photo album from my younger days. As I flipped through it, one particular photo stood out. It was from a beach party. There I was, holding a margarita in one hand, wearing a bright orange bikini, laughing like I didn't have a care in the world. A carefree young Elizabeth, beaming with joy, stared back at me. Looking at that photo stirred something inside me. It was a mix of warmth and sadness. Memories I'd buried long ago, desires and excitement I'd suppressed, all came rushing back. And just then, I heard a sound coming from the basement door. Startled, I turned around to see Bruce, my step-grandson, standing there. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. He looked broader now, more grown up, with that familiar smile of his. The last time I saw him, he was 23. Now, he must have been 27. "Surprise," he said, lifting a coffee cup in the air. "Bruce, when did you get here?" I asked, caught off guard, but genuinely happy to see him. "Just now," he replied, making his way down the stairs. "Saw your car outside and figured I'd come in. Looks like you could use some help." I was about to say, "No, I've got this." But before I could, he'd already walked over, a determined look on his face for someone so young. His eyes landed on the album I was holding. "What's this?" he asked before I could snatch the photo out of his hand. I froze for a moment. His eyes were locked on that picture of young Elizabeth on the beach. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity before turning to me. Is this you?" "Well, yeah," I said with a nervous laugh. "My wild years back in the day." Bruce's gaze shifted from the photo back to me. There was something in his eyes, a mix of admiration and surprise. It was both unsettling and oddly kind of warming. "Wow, it's weird to think of you like this, but impressive," he said, smiling. "If you're enjoying these little confessions, join me on my channel for more. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, this story is just getting started. And it's one you won't want to miss." I felt a flicker of something inside me, something I couldn't quite understand. Feelings I had buried for years, emotions David had never truly awakened in me. They surfaced for just a moment. But this wasn't right. It couldn't be. "All right, enough with the trip down memory lane," I said quickly, closing the album. "We've got to start hauling these old boxes out of here." But I had no idea where that photo, Bruce's expressions, and this storm brewing inside me were going to take me. Bruce gently stopped my hands as I tried to close the album. We really need to look at this, he said, half joking, half serious. It's unbelievable seeing you so young, vibrant, and different. Come on, let's look a little more. I hesitated for a moment. Not all the pictures in that album were innocent. Beyond those carefree beach snapshots, there were bolder photos, moments that captured the wilder side of my youth. But seeing how fascinated Bruce was, and feeling the admiration in his eyes, I couldn't say no. All right, I said, with a small smile, but some of these photos might be a bit much. Bruce chuckled and nodded. I'm sure everything's great, he said, taking the album into his lap. As he sat down beside me, his breath was close enough to brush my skin. As we flipped through the pages, the beach party photos gave way to snapshots of my college years in nightclubs. One photo showed me in a tight, backless red dress, dancing tipsily. Bruce lingered on that one, staring at it a little too long. "This is really you?" he asked, his eyes darting between the photo and me, his face lighting up with a mix of awe and curiosity. "Yeah," I replied a little. "Let's go inside," I said. "It's late." We went inside. The nightmare of what had just happened stayed with us like an unexpected truth. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew we'd crossed a line. And I wasn't sure there was any turning back. Next up, tomorrow's sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden lines across the room. I stood up, reviewing the events of the previous night, and in my mind, it felt amazing. I was in a calm, like a bad dream. I couldn't escape. I could hear David smiling softly beside me, unaware of the storm raging just outside our room. I needed to get outside, to think. Quietly, I climbed out of the ground and made my way to the kitchen, breathing in the cold air and the familiar smell of the woods. But the moment my hand touched the floor, the fleet of emotions came rushing back. This wasn't a dream. What happened last night was real. I heard footsteps behind me and found Logan standing in the doorway again, staring at me uncertainly. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Tomorrow," I replied, forcing a smile, but he felt fragile. Fragile. He came closer. "The night before." I cut it off. "Logan, let's not do this. It was late. We were both tired. We said things we didn't mean. Let's leave it. Let's leave it. Is it okay?" But he didn't look. His eyes were intense, full of something she couldn't deny. "I can't forget it." He said it calmly, "and I don't think you can either." I went back to the door, trying to study myself. "We have to." "Logan," I screamed. "I heard it. There is no other option. You say that." He said it, getting closer. "But I don't believe you." Right then, I heard David moving around the room, and the tension between Logan and me broke. I looked at him, and he returned, retiring to the room. David entered the kitchen. In the room, forced to exchange emotions. "Tomorrow, love," he murmured, snapping his arms around me. "Tomorrow." I managed to say it, even though it felt distant. The rest of the day dragged on, and every moment with Logan felt heavy, carried away. David continued to laugh and joke, completely unaware of the tension between us. As the sun began to warm up, David suggested we return to the room for an early dinner. I agreed, desperate to retreat from the growing storm inside me. Back in the room, I busied myself in the kitchen, shredding vegetables with a focus on frantic. Logan stayed close. His presence made every movement feel too cramped, too stuffy. At one point, our backs were erased, and I got bored. "You're avoiding me," he said softly. "I'm not," I replied through clenching fingers, without wanting to look at me. "You are," he insisted. "And I get it. I get it. But we can't ignore it forever." I put the knife down. My hands moved, I turned to face him. We have to. I shouted loudly to myself. This is not true, Logan. It can't happen. Before he could answer, David called from the room, asking what was taking so long. I quickly got in line, forcing a smile. The money is almost ready. I called back. The rest of the evening passed in a jumble. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the rustling of gold linen and David's occasional comment. I couldn't look at Logan. I couldn't risk meeting his eyes. When the money ran out, I apologized, claiming exhaustion. But as I closed the money door behind me, the tears turned hot and dark. A soft knock on the door made me freeze. I didn't want to face him, but he walked in anyway. Logan sat across from me, his eyes filled with desire and pain. "We need to talk," he shouted. I raised my head, wiping away my tears. "No, we can't. We can't." But he didn't listen. He sat down in front of me, holding my hands in his palms. He screamed. His voice broke. "Please don't push me." I looked down, and in that moment, everything inside me broke. His touch was delicate, desperate, and it was like we had crossed a point of no return. The kiss that followed was not gentle. I was hungry, filled with every emotion we both tried so hard to bear. When it was over, we stood together, trembling. The silence between us, heavy with the knowledge that what was over could never be finished. Infinite being. "What have we done?" I screamed. Logan kissed my head and he screamed. "Something we can't take back. But I don't regret it. Neither do I. And that scared me more than anything." The next few days felt like an endless desert, where the world seemed out of focus. We talked about our routines, but everything felt different. Every sight of Logan felt like an unheard conversation, a shared secret that neither of us could escape. David remained oblivious, happy, and without a care, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. I could feel it in every word, every touch, every moment I spent with Logan at night. When the house was quiet and David was fast asleep, Logan and I shared quiet moments, staring across the room. Sometimes we sat together, but the distance between us was always palpable. The memory of what we shared came between us, like a shadow we couldn't escape. One night, while I was preparing dinner, Logan appeared in the kitchen. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at me. I could feel his eyes on me, and it made my heart race, even when I tried to ignore it. "You've been still," he finally said. His voice was soft, but with a weight I couldn't ignore. "I'm just trying to focus on what's in front of me," I replied, trying to keep my tone level. "There's a lot to do." But I knew it wasn't just the dinner that was weighing on me. It was everything. Everything that had happened between us. Everything we were avoiding. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted, her voice barely a scream. "Never." About what happened and what we both felt. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Logan, we've talked about this before. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." But his head came closer, passing closer. "It was not a mistake. I've never felt more confident about anything in my life. You can't keep pretending it didn't happen." "I'm back." My pulse quickened. "This isn't true. Logan, we can't go on this road. It's not healthy." He took a deep breath. Then he reached for my hand. "Mom, I don't care what's right or wrong. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you, about us." His words were like a weight on my chest. I was suffering, but something inside me wanted to listen. I wanted to give myself. I threw my hand away, hanging my head. "No, we can't do this. This isn't us. You're my son." "But what if it's more than that?" She pressed him. "What if we're nothing more than mother and son? What if this is something more? something real. Tears filled my eyes, and I looked at each other, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know what this is, Logan, but this can't be. Logan didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at me, and for a moment I thought he might say something else, something that would change everything. But it didn't. He just screamed and walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen, cold. The days that followed were filled with silences and tense moments. Every time Logan looked at me, I could feel the intensity of his gaze, a gaze that seemed to see right through me. And every time I felt that same tension in my chest, that mix of guilt, fear, and desire I couldn't shake. I tried to keep my distance, to focus on nothing but the emotions floating inside me. But every time I looked at Logan, the weight of our shared secret dared to consume me. One night, as I sat at the table, looking up at the stars, Logan came to join me. We sat in silence. The only thing you can hear is the sound of the trees and the distant calls of the animals at night. I know it's hard, she said, breaking the silence, but I don't regret what happened, and I can't keep pretending I didn't care. I took a breath, trying to study myself. I don't know what to say. Logan, you don't have to say anything, she replied silently. I just needed you to know that I wasn't going anywhere. I can't. Not when I care so much. The sincerity in his voice tugged at my heartstrings, and for the first time, I realized that the road ahead of us wasn't easy. The love he spoke of, no matter how bad it felt, was real, and I couldn't do anything to break it from my heart. I stood up, wiping a tear that had escaped from my eye. We have to stop this. Logan, for our own sake, this can't happen again. He was there, also. His face opened, but his eyes were still filled with that same deep desire. I understand, he said. His voice broke. But I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either. The days after that conversation were filled with tension. I tried to pretend things were normal, but it was impossible. Every time Logan looked at me, I saw the truth in his eyes, and every time I looked at myself, I felt like I was brought here. Finally, on the last night of our journey, when the stars shone brightly above us and the warm night air filled my wings, I realized I couldn't get away from this anymore. The emotions, the confusion, the guilt, neither of them could be ignored. Logan and I joined together once again, under the big sky, and for a moment, everything else disappeared in the silence of the night. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. But then I pulled away. I can't do this, I screamed at myself. My voice was shaking. Logan didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw both pain and understanding. I knew it was okay, but I also knew that neither of us would ever forget what happened. No matter how hard we tried, we walked back inside, side by side. But the distance between us was already growing. I knew it was never going to end. Not for any of us. The consequences of our actions would always linger in the background, impossible to forget. And even when I fell asleep at night, listening to the soft sounds of the world outside, I knew that nothing would be the same again. And the next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside the cabin. But it felt different. The air was dry with something I hadn't said. Something had changed everything. I found myself lying in bed for a long time, unable to move, my mind replaying everything, every look, every touch, every word spoken between Logan and I. It was a dream I couldn't escape, a truth I felt suffocating. David was already up when I left the room. Oblivious to the storm that had been raging between Logan and me, he pulled me closer with his usual sound, a warm sound that felt strangely far away now. Tomorrow. love," he said, kissing my head as he passed me in the kitchen. "Tomorrow," I replied, trying to sound normal, but it came out far away, forced. My smile felt like a mask, and it couldn't hide the emptiness inside. I busied myself with breakfast, pretending that everything was fine, although the weight of what had happened still sat heavily on me. Logan arrived shortly after. He sat at the table with a silent eye. He didn't speak, but his eyes were filled with something I couldn't put down, a mix of return, desire, and pain. I couldn't look at him for too long. I couldn't stand it. His presence was like a constant reminder of the line we'd crossed, and the more I tried to push him away, the stronger he became. The day passed slowly. Each moment was hectic. As I did my best to avoid any more private conversations with Logan, every time we crossed paths, there was an invisible barrier between us, one that we both knew was there, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge it. In the morning, we prepared to leave the cabin. The trip back home was quiet. The banter and laughter were open. I could feel Logan's gaze on me again, but this time I couldn't meet him. I was too scared of what I might see in his eyes. The familiar places of home should have been comforting, but they only added to the nightmare that had been left in my heart. I thought that once we were back in our own space, everything would go back to normal, but I knew it was a lie. Nothing would ever be normal again. David was busy unloading the car, and I stood in the doorway looking at him. But my mind was somewhere else. Logan came in behind me, and for a moment I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He just stood there looking at me with that same unthinkable expression. I could feel the tension building again, the desire to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, we stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, until he finally turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't stop myself from following him, although I didn't know why. It was like I was grinding towards him, against my better judgment. When I got to the room, Logan was standing by the window. His back was to me. I hesitated for a moment, not knowing what to do or say, but then he spoke, his voice barely a shout. "Never. I'm sorry," he said. "I know things are bad, but I can't forget it. I can't pretend it never happened." I was cold, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. That was it, the moment when everything had to happen. But I didn't know how to fix it. How could I? "I know," I replied softly, my voice barely below a scream. "But we have to move on. We have to forget about it." His back is fixed, and I could see the frustration in his posture. "You can't tell me to forget. You understand. You can't make me pretend I don't feel this way. I can't let it go. It's not that easy." I turn it up hard, the pain in my chest almost unstoppable. "Logan," I screamed, "we can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending. It's wrong." He turned slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. "I know, it's wrong, but I can't help changing how I feel. I don't know how to change it." I took a step back. My body was all tingling. "You have to, for both of us, for our family." But even as I said the words, I knew what we had done couldn't be infinite. The feelings, the connection, the kindness, whatever. It was already there, and he wasn't going to leave. Logan didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes locked with mine, a silent understanding passing between us. He didn't have to say anything more. We both knew what had happened, and we both knew that everything had changed. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried to move on, no matter how much I wanted to pretend it had never happened, I would always carry it with me. It would always be a part of who we were. As I opened up and walked back into the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel